On March 6, 1933, Americans went to sleep with money in their banks. They woke up with none of it. Not because the banks failed. Because the government closed them. Every single one overnight, no warning, no vote. And the window to act, it had already closed the night before. Right now, most people watching this believe they have access to their money. They believe they could move it, withdraw it, or redirect it within a day if they needed to. Most of them are wrong. Not because their bank is failing, because they've never actually tested it. And the uncomfortable truth about financial crises, the thing history repeats without apology, is this: the people who find out they were wrong, find out too late. In every major financial disruption in history, the critical window was never weeks, never months. It was 48 hours, sometimes less. That's not a theory. That's the historical record, from the 1933 banking holiday to the 2001 Argentine Corralito, to the 2013 Cyprus bank haircut, to the 2023 Silicon Valley bank collapse. By the time the news was mainstream, the exit had already narrowed. And here's what makes this different from every "be prepared" conversation you've ever had. This isn't about predicting a crisis. It's about knowing with certainty whether you can move your essential capital in 24 hours or not. Because right now, today, in your current financial structure, you either can or you can't. And most people have never checked. In the next few minutes, you're going to know exactly where you stand. And if you stay until the end, I'm going to give you 3 specific macroeconomic signals, publicly available, free, and almost no one is watching, that tell you when the 24-hour window is starting to shrink. Let's start with 1933, because it's the blueprint for everything that came after. Franklin Roosevelt declared a banking holiday that closed every federally licensed bank in the United States for 8 days. Not because of fraud, not because of panic, because of systemic stress in the credit system. The people who had already moved a portion of their capital out of single institutions into accessible instruments, into accounts at multiple banks, experienced that week differently than those who hadn't. Not as a catastrophe, as a manageable inconvenience. That gap between those who had structured their capital for mobility and those who hadn't is what the 24-hour rule is designed to close. Fast forward to Buenos Aires 2001. The Argentine government froze bank accounts overnight. The restriction on withdrawals, what became known as the Corralito, lasted months. People who had international accounts, dollar holdings outside the domestic system, or accessible liquid assets moved through it. Everyone else was trapped inside their own money. Cyprus 2013. The European Union and IMF authorized a direct haircut on uninsured bank deposits. Accounts above a certain threshold weren't just frozen, they were reduced. Permanently. The decision was made over a weekend. Silicon Valley Bank 2023. A $200 billion bank collapsed in 40 hours. Depositors with uninsured balances discovered that emergency access approval would take weeks. Some businesses couldn't make payroll. One pattern across 90 years of financial history. The window is always shorter than people expect. Now here's where it gets specific, because move your money faster isn't a strategy, it's a wish. The real problem isn't motivation, it's friction. Inside the banking system, there's a regulatory infrastructure called AML, anti-money laundering, combined with KYC, know your customer compliance. These frameworks exist for legitimate security reasons, but they serve a secondary function that most depositors never think about. They are also a liquidity governor. During normal times, they're nearly invisible. You make a transfer, it clears in a day or two, no friction, no questions. During stress, that same infrastructure tightens. Large withdrawals trigger automated flags. Transfers above certain thresholds require manual review. Moving capital to a new institution, one where you have no established relationship, can take 5 to 10 business days for compliance clearance. International transfers face enhanced scrutiny. None of this is malicious, but all of it slows your exit velocity to near zero at precisely the moment you need it to move fast. And here's the critical part: these aren't theoretical delays. They're built into the system by design. The same infrastructure that protects you from fraud becomes the system that slows your emergency response. Which means the time to establish frictionless financial channels is not during a crisis. It's now, when everything is calm. This is what financial readiness actually looks like. Not a spreadsheet, not a prediction, a preposition system. Let me ask you something. If you needed to access not all of your money, just 90 days of your household's essential expenses, within the next 24 hours in a form you could physically control, how many steps would that take? Most people, when they think through this for the first time, discover something uncomfortable. They are 100% concentrated in a single institutional rail. One bank, one brokerage, one payment network. Every asset, checking, savings, investments, emergency fund running through the same institution or the same infrastructure. That's not financial organization, that's a single point of failure. In systems engineering, the discipline that designs aircraft, power grids, hospital systems, this is called a critical vulnerability. Every system that matters is built with redundancy by default. They call it parallel rails. If one system fails, another is already running. Your financial life deserves the same architecture. Parallel rails in personal finance means maintaining, at minimum, a second institution with an established relationship, meaning you've already made transfers to and from it, you've passed identity verification, you've built compliance history, a money market or cash equivalent position outside your primary brokerage, and at minimum one form of liquid capital that exists independently from your primary banking network. This isn't distrust of banks. It's an understanding that any single system has failure modes. And building around those failure modes is what prepared families do quietly, without drama, long before anyone else thinks it's necessary. Now let's identify what I call liquidity choke points. These are the places in your portfolio where the gap between "I own this" and "I can use this" is wider than you realize. A 401k or IRA in normal times accessible. In an emergency, early withdrawal triggers penalties and tax implications that make it functionally inaccessible without significant cost. It is not emergency liquidity. It is long-term capital with an expensive lock. A brokerage account with equities, technically liquid, but during a market dislocation, the assets you'd need to sell are often the ones whose prices have dropped most dramatically. Selling under duress at depressed prices is a different kind of trap. A home equity line of credit feels like liquidity. But a HELOC can be frozen by the lending institution if property values decline or if credit conditions tighten. It happened in 2008 to thousands of homeowners who assumed that credit line would be there. None of this means these are bad assets. It means they are not emergency capital. They are long-term assets wearing a liquidity costume. True emergency capital, the kind that satisfies the 24-hour liquidity test, is held in instruments that can move in one business day without restriction, penalty, or price risk. Money market accounts at a separate institution, short-term treasury instruments, credit unions with established relationships. Your liquidity choke point isn't where your money is. It's where your money can't move when you need it most. Here's the drill. Pick a number: 90 days of your household's essential expenses. Mortgage or rent, food, utilities, insurance. That's your minimum liquidity target. Now answer honestly. How quickly can you access that amount in usable form from a source completely independent of your primary bank? Not "I have it in my brokerage, how many days to transfer out?" Not "I have a HELOC, under what conditions can it be frozen?" Not "I can sell something, at what price, on what timeline, with what penalty?" Most people who run this drill discover their actual 24-hour accessible capital is a fraction of what they assumed. Some discover it's near zero. That's not a catastrophe, that's information. And information, when you have it in a moment of calm, becomes a strategy. Now the 3 signals. These are publicly available macroeconomic indicators that have historically shown movement before every major banking disruption. Not predictions, observations, and monitoring them costs nothing. The first is the SOFR spread, the secured overnight financing rate. When the gap between SOFR and short-term treasury yields begins to widen abnormally, it signals that banks are becoming cautious about lending to each other. Banks don't become cautious without reason. The SOFR data is published daily by the Federal Reserve. In September and October 2025, it showed stress spikes that preceded public awareness of funding pressure by weeks. Watch this number. When it moves, notice. The second is the Federal Reserve Standing Repo Facility Usage, the SRF. In normal conditions, it's near zero. The Fed publishes this data publicly every day. In October 2025, the SRF recorded its largest single-day draw in over 2 decades, $29.4 billion in one session. That wasn't a red alert, but it was a clear signal that the system's plumbing was under pressure. When SRF usage climbs from near zero to consistent daily draws, the system is beginning to vibrate. That's the moment your 24-hour positioning matters most. The third is deposit flow data. The Federal Reserve publishes weekly data on commercial bank deposits through its H8 release. During the 2023 SVB collapse, deposit outflows from specific bank categories became visible in this data before the collapse was public news. You don't need to read it daily. Monthly is sufficient, but knowing it exists and knowing what abnormal looks like puts you weeks ahead of the crowd. All three are available through the Federal Reserve's FRED database. Free, bookmarkable, readable without a finance degree. You don't need to watch them obsessively, but having them bookmarked means that if conditions change, you're watching before the news starts covering it. The 24-hour rule isn't about fear. It's about precision. The families who navigated the 1933 banking holiday without disruption weren't prescient. They weren't lucky. They had structured their financial lives around a simple recognition. Any single system, no matter how trusted, can experience moments of restriction. Parallel rails, frictionless assets, established relationships at secondary institutions, a clear number representing 90 days of essential expenses held in instruments that can move in one business day. These aren't radical moves, they're what calm, prepared people do. The Emergency Liquidity Protocol takes about 30 minutes on a Saturday morning. Most people who do it once do it every year, not because they expect a crisis, because knowing the answer to that question changes how they think about financial stability. Being early feels unnecessary. Being late feels like a tragedy. The 24-hour rule ensures you are never the latter. Start there.